I am a man by the name of Thyreus, a scribe and historian. The 29th king of Ultyra recorded the beginning of his reign in his own journal, just as many other kings of Ultyra had done in the past. I've studied his journal entries and the historical records of his reign, and by the prompting of Toniel's spirit, I have decided to write about them in this scroll. King Pollux reigned from 4591 to 4869 years after creation. In the year 4591, the same year that King Castor lost his sanity and died, Pollux took the throne of Ultyra. His name had already begun to spread in popularity throughout the kingdom, and many viewed him with great respect. Pollux's coronation was a strange one. While many of the citizens of Ultyra were still in shock over what had happened to Castor, many were also glad to have a new king. The people put their hope in Pollux, that he would lead the kingdom in a better direction than Castor or Calvus. They wanted a man strong and capable, yet wise, just like Ankajar. Pollux himself also sought to fulfill their desire. In the midst of all this, the Great War was raging on throughout the rift plains of Oresta. The planet of Arden was protected for a temporary time from the full calamities of the war. While battles still took place on Arden, they were not as destructive or long-lasting as the rest of the worlds. However, during the years of King Pollux's reign, the war began to take over Arden again. In the spring of the year 4591, one twilight evening, King Pollux gave a speech to the people from the palace gates. He said thus unto the people, "People of Ultyra, I pray you will all find the peace you once had, peace you have not found since the beginning of Calvus' reign. My father Puluvius led many of you astray, when he deceived you to believe that Calvus was an evil king. But he was a man, just like the lot of you, and just as I. I now stand here, asking you for your forgiveness, for how my father lied to you." When he said this, the members of the Ultaran Council who were listening became restless. Pollux continued, "Many of you can still remember the days when Alfortsier Ankajar was our king. Truly, his passing was grievous. But now he is in Amnia, where he belongs, in the presence of Toniel and the other Sentients. And why did he pass on to Amnia? It is because he followed the light. You all saw the example my elder brother gave for you. He followed the darkness, and it brought him to his death, for the eye given to lust is blind. Now he will never know any peace, for his soul and spirit are trapped in the fires of Hylvan." When he mentioned Hylvan, some protested, and some became afraid. Many had not thought about the temporal nature of their physical lives. His speech carried on, "Unlike my brother, I am seeking with all my heart to live up to the standard which King Ankajar set. I do not want to be a bearer of the darkness, but rather of the light. And I would pray that all of you would follow the light as well. As your new leader, I desire that each and every one of you will not be given to an eternal destiny in Hylvan. Now most of you have chosen to forget about one thing. You have forgotten that the Great War is still raging on beyond our world. The beast is still out there, and it seeks to destroy mankind through themselves. The war may soon be upon us again. I will seek to build up our armies again, and I will lead this kingdom to victory, to the best of my ability." And after he said this, he ended his speech. When Pollux was still new to the throne, the Ultaran Council created a subdivision which was in charge of keeping an eye on the other lands of Arden. King Pollux organized their formation, saying, "I will need a group of soldiers, tacticians, spies, and Aeons who can scout the lands of Arden and gain information concerning their affairs. I will have all the information you obtain given to the council, and they will convey the information to me. Since the war is soon returning to us, we need to know what other kingdoms and nations are planning to do. I will not have the people in fear over lack of knowledge." The members of the subdivision were soon brought together, and Pollux called them the Eyes of Ultyra. 1 year after Pollux was made Ultyra's new king, he said to his royal servants, "I plan to embark to the Rift Plain Pyra, to seek and find Calvus and Glora. For I have often found myself questioning how their lives have been since their exile, and I wish to see if they still follow the light. I ask that you take care of the palace in my absence, and that you watch the council with keen eyes." Once Pollux had left Ultyra, he arrived through the Rift Gate in the city of Okunai, in the province of Zeoa on Pyra. From that city he traveled into the valleys of the Zeoa clifftops, till he reached a village called Menma, a village hidden under the bamboo trees. When Pollux entered the village, he could see which house belonged to Calvus, for Glora was sitting outside with her child Icarus. As Pollux began to walk towards their house, a couple of the other villagers came out and said to him, "What is the king of Ultyra doing here? Have you come to bother Calvus and Glora as well? Let them alone." But Pollux replied, "No, I seek not to talk down to them. After all, I stood against their dethroning. I have merely come to speak with them as with an old friend." And the villagers understood, and they saw that Pollux's heart was different from their previous Ultaran visitors. Glora saw Pollux from afar, then she went inside. She said to Calvus, "The king of Ultyra has come to visit us. What shall we do?" Calvus answered, "Is it Castor, or is it Pollux? If it is Castor, tell him he is not allowed near this village." She said, "It is the younger one, the one with shorter and darker hair." And Calvus went to look out of a window to see him. Then he said, "It is Pollux. We may go and ask him why he has come." So Calvus and Glora left their house to meet Pollux. They met each other halfway while on a bridge over the village creek. Calvus said to Pollux, "Young man, what have you come to our land for? Have you also come to make me beg for forgiveness?" Then Pollux said, "I believe you were a good king, but one who let the darkness take root in your heart. I blame my father and the council for your exile, not your siege on the kingdom of Hesbon." "Then you are one of a kind, Pollux," Calvus replied. Pollux then said, "I came to see how you and your wife were doing living in exile, and to see if you have been following the light." Calvus answered hesitantly, saying, "I did indeed fall to the darkness then. But now, because of Glora, and because I have now begotten a son, I have been trying to follow the light. My wife and son are what give me strength to continue walking in the light." And Pollux said, "This is truly a beautiful thing to hear. I have prayed every night since your exile for your life to be blessed by Toniel." Then Glora interceded, saying, "I would say our life is blessed, yet the consequences of Calvus' actions have affected us still to this day. We will teach our son Icarus these things, so that he may not grow to become one who follows the darkness." Glora handed Icarus to Calvus and said, "Take him inside while I go to draw water." Then Calvus gestured to Pollux to follow him inside. Inside Calvus' house, Pollux sat under their kotatsu. Calvus sat across from him, with Icarus sitting on his lap. He then said to Pollux, "I am in awe that the king of Ultyra has come to check on me, as if I were his friend. I remember only seeing you once. Yet here you are, concerned with my whereabouts." Then Pollux said, "Though we may have never been well acquainted in the past, I believe we can build a good friendship today. I always admired you as king, and I was fearful when you left and went into exile. It is not fair, for the throne of Ultyra belongs to the Fraser family. Yours is the bloodline which received the promise of the Dawn Star, the one who will one day vanquish the darkness." After he said this, Calvus leaned back from the kotatsu, sighing, and said, "It's been so long since I have been shown any form of respect or admiration. Had your father had the same heart as you, my life would not have been where it is today." Then Pollux inquired, "If I may ask, how has raising your child with Glora been since your exile?" Calvus began to explain his life since their exile, saying, "When Glora and I had reached the mountains of Grianara on the highway chariot, we stopped to rest in a small town in the valley. From there we continued onward until we reached Thasha, and we paid the toll for the Rift Gate. When we arrived on Pyra, we were given aid from the nearby townsfolk, because Glora was about to enter labor. She gave birth to Icarus there in the town of Okunai. Though we began to live in that town for the first few months, we ran out of coins to pay for our food and housing, so we moved out of Okunai. It was then that we came upon this peaceful village in the bamboo forests." He then continued, saying, "The villagers here in Menma have been so kind to us, especially having known what I had done to the kingdom of Hesbon. When Icarus was but a babe, the other women of the village would come to spend time with Glora while she nursed him. Now as a more grown child, Icarus sometimes plays with the other children when we make our visits to Okunai and Soksan. However, the people of Soksan are not as accepting of us, though they would not admit it." Pollux then inquired, saying, "Have you been able to teach Icarus things, now that he is a bit older?" And Calvus replied, "Yes, we have. Though he is not able to fully understand the nature of the beast or of the war, Glora reads to him the scrolls my father once possessed." Now when their conversation had begun to deepen, Pollux took Icarus aside, and spoke softly to him, saying, "You love your father, and he loves you. So does your mother. You are so loved here, Antonio in Amnia is watching over you. Know that you are cherished by your family, and that nothing will separate you from their love." And Icarus placed his thumb in his mouth, and he softly smiled. When Glora had returned with her water buckets, she placed them down beside the kitchen outside, and came inside to see Calvus and Pollux. And she said to them, "I hope you two have had enough time to get to know each other. How would you fancy staying the night with us, your highness?" But Pollux said, "I have enjoyed spending time with you, but I am afraid I must decline your offer. For I have duties to fulfill as king, and I cannot afford to give the council much time over the people while I am absent." Calvus remarked, "I understand fully what you mean, good sir." And after they left the house to say farewell, Calvus and Glora each embraced Pollux in their arms. And Calvus said, "Farewell, good friend." And Pollux left to return to the rift gate by the town of Okunai. From that day on, Pollux began to visit them at a certain time each year, until Icarus was a grown man. Now after Pollux had returned to Altyra, he went to the Ultaran council to check on them. And he sent the eyes of Altyra on their first assignment, and they were split up to go to each of the lands of the eastern continent. About 3 weeks later, while Pollux was busy working on his army, the spies sent to Grianara returned to the palace with haste. The spies came to see King Pollux in the throne room, and they said, "Your Highness, troops from the city of Visha are on their way to Altyra. They are marching through the valleys of Grianara as we speak." And King Pollux said, "Let us not rush to battle. I will write a peace treaty to their king." Then he said to his guards, "Send forth the army into the mountains to meet the army of Visha halfway. After I write the treaty, I will give it to the general, so that he may give it to their general." But the spies said, "Sire, they have catapults." "We must try to make peace regardless," Pollux replied. Pollux finished writing the treaty, and he gave it to the general of the army. The army marched down the public street leading from the palace to the southern gate, and the hearts of the citizens grew afraid. They said to themselves, "Has the war come to us today? Surely no other kingdom could bring harm to the kingdom of Altyra, for we have the greatest military on Arden." And the sound of the horses and war chariots brought fear to the hearts of the children running about the streets. In about 2 days, the Ultaran army reached the inner valleys of Grianara, where the Visha army was marching through. The two armies stopped before each other, and the general of Altyra raised his hand in the air, to signal that they meant no harm. Then he grabbed the treaty which Pollux had given him. Once the general had raised the treaty in the air, he said, "You soldiers of Visha, look at what I hold in my left hand. It is sealed with the seal of the king of Altyra. Where is your commander? For we ask that he reads this scroll." After he said this, a tall man riding on a horse galloped out from the midst of the Visha army. The man rode towards the general, and he took the scroll from him. And he began to unravel the scroll to read it. The man finished reading it, then laughed, saying, "Your king is puny. He is but a little boy, trying to hide from battle. He wants us to turn away peacefully? Ha! We have been sent to take over Altyra, and that is what we shall do." Then the man unsheathed his claymore and swung it across the general's chest. As the general fell, the Ultaran army began to charge with full force toward the Visha army. Angry shouts and war cries arose from the Ultaran army, as their troops weaved through the Visha army. One by one, soldiers fell. The catapults were loaded from the backlines of the Visha army, and their aeons set them on fire. The valley became a bloodbath, and many Ultaran soldiers were struck down. However, the Visha army had less troops than Altyra, and they were eventually overpowered. The Ultaran Aeons were also more skilled with their arc-light abilities than Visha's, and they destroyed their catapults. When the Visha army saw that they were decreasing in their numbers, their commander shouted, "Fall back! Fall back!" And the entire army turned around to flee. But the Ultaran army caught up to them, and they maimed every one of their remaining troops, including their commander. The Ultaran army had about 4,000 troops left after the battle. The Ultarans now began to return to the Ultaran plain. And while they were coming through the valley that leads into the plains of Altyra, an army of soldiers from the kingdom of Marisa was marching towards Altyra from the east. When King Pollux saw the army forming from the mountains on the horizon, he sent forth another section of the army to go to stop them. The army marched through the main street of the city to exit through the eastern gates. In an hour's time, the two armies met each other on the Ultaran plains. The battle between the Ultaran and Marisa armies lasted about 3 hours, until Marisa's numbers were cut down massively. The army of Marisa now only had about 150 troops, and the Ultaran army still had many Aeons in their numbers. The Ultaran Aeons gathered around the remaining troops of Marisa and rained down lightning from the heavens. The grass of the plain was set ablaze, and the Aeons watched as the Marisa soldiers were burned alive. Now by this point, before they had gone forth to attack Ultaira, the cities of Visha and Marisa had begun to conspire together. The two cities joined forces, and their kings said to each other, "The kingdom of Ultaira has been the superpower of Arden for far too long now. But who can conquer that great city? Let us join forces, so that we may stand a chance." But now that both of their armies were wiped out, before they could yet reach the city of Ultaira, the kings were greatly ashamed. And now they said, "What has taken over us? Why did we rush into battle without hesitation? What has influenced our hearts to seek destruction?" And the one they referred to was Infernos, the beast. Now after the two armies were put down, King Pollux said to his people, "2 more kingdoms have fallen under the influence of the beast. What then shall we do as a nation? Shall we go and fight, that our name be made greater? Let it never be. Yet we must fight to protect our kingdom, while seeking to find peace, as much as it is possible." After he made this speech, he was invited to the council by Aranotha, one of the chair members. King Pollux sat in the presence of the chair members of the council, and Aranotha faced him. Aranotha said, "Your Majesty, we have been having a discussion as to whether or not the city of Elvok in the land of Pashur will attack us. They have already begun to strengthen their military. Many kingdoms have been threatening to conquer us as of late, and they may be the next to attempt this ridiculous feat." Pollux then kept his silence. After spending some time in his thoughts, Pollux said, "Are you sure this is a wise decision? What confirmation do you have that they plan to attack us?" And Aranotha said, "We do not have, nor do we need, any confirmation of this, except that of common sense. Why would they not attempt to conquer us?" And Pollux said, "Can we not make peace with them?" But Aranotha replied, "That is not an option. If they are not wiped out, they may try to conquer us still." Now when the council had made it clear to the king that they wanted him to wipe out the city of Elvok, Pollux sent forth the Ultaran army once again. And he said to himself, "Why must the council be so reckless? I will humor their ideas for now, but not for long. For the beast has taken a hold of their hearts, and they seek to destroy others without cause." It was after this that King Pollux would heed the voice of the council no longer. With the Ultaran army fully readied, King Pollux sent them forth to the land of Pashur in the south, to the city of Elvok. Now the city of Elvok had been preparing for any attacks that other nations may bring upon them, contrary to the council's paranoid speculations. For they were not prepared to fight, but solely to defend themselves. And the people of Elvok were being kept in their homes for their own safety, while their guards patrolled the walls, which they fortified with strong materials. The army of Ultaira approaching Elvok caused the ground to rumble, and the guards who could see them approaching from the distance began to shudder with great fear. And they ran into the city to warn the citizens, shouting, "We are doomed. Ultaira has come. This is the end for us." And the leaders of the city, who were hiding in the Oscurarium at the time, ran outside when they heard the guards come shouting. And they said to themselves, "What shall we do? Ultaira is the greatest kingdom on Arden, and they have never lost a single battle for thousands of years." The army of Ultaira finally reached the city of Elvok, and they attacked the northern wall with great force. The entire northern section of the city wall came crumbling down, and all the guards inside of it were crushed. The Ultaran Aeons ran into the city with torches, with which they shot out balls of fire into homes and marketplaces. The screams of families echoed from the living quarters of the city. When the Ultaran soldiers noticed that Elvok had no troops of their own, they began to halt their attack. And some of the soldiers said to each other, "Would His Majesty want us to destroy a city which cannot fend for itself?" After the siege ceased for a moment, the Ultaran soldiers began to talk amongst themselves while mounted on their horses. General Karlim, who was seated in the leading war chariot, stepped out onto the ground to observe the burning city around them. Karlim exclaimed, "What have we done?" And when he heard the other soldiers, that they were questioning this as well, his heart grieved for the people of Elvok. Then he ordered the soldiers who had entered the city, saying, His Majesty King Pollux would not want this. Many lives have been lost already. I see now how the council was wrong. Let us return to the kingdom. And all the soldiers who had entered the city began to leave through the northern gates, and the troops waiting outside followed behind them as they began their journey back into the mountains of Grianara. Now when the army had made it back to Ultira, the Ultaran council was busy negotiating with King Pollux. For they were attempting to persuade him to attack yet another city, saying, The cities of the land of Anarek have been preparing their offenses. Beshthaba has the largest military in Anarek, therefore we shall send forth our army to put them down. But King Pollux tried reasoning with them, saying, Why must you insist on going into battle with every nation? What have they done? And the council said, They need not attack us beforehand to prove we must attack first. Nay, but they may seek to bring our kingdom down. But the Ultaran army had not yet returned to the city to tell Pollux of Elvok's condition. So Pollux decided one last time that he would humor the council. King Pollux set forth yet another division of the military to go into the northern land of Anarek. And after the army had already left Ultira, the returning army had now returned to the kingdom. Then General Karlin came to the throne room to kneel before King Pollux, and said, Your Highness, the city of Elvok had no way to defend itself. They bore neither sword nor arrow, nor had they any aeons. No, but they had been preparing themselves solely for defense against outside attackers. After he heard this, Pollux said to himself, Why did I yet humor the council again by sending another army? Had you told me this sooner, I would have denied the council. Eventually, the Ultaran army reached the city of Beshthaba in the land of Anarek. The city of Beshthaba, second in size to the capital of Anarek, the city of Hithra, has a much larger military than the capital itself. In those years, when Pollux reigned, the city of Beshthaba was beginning to advance technologically, and they began to utilize more potent arc-light crystals in their airships. They spent most of their resources on accumulating military power. When the army of Ultira reached the plains of Anarek, they surrounded the city of Beshthaba. And because the city was asleep, for it was the middle of the night, their airships were not in operation. Ultira encamped itself around the city walls, waiting for the proper moment to strike. And when the generals gave the command, the troops stormed the city, and they struck down all guards and soldiers that stood in their path. The city of Beshthaba, though known for its military prowess, in a moment of weakness, was conquered. They did not stand a chance. Now when the Ultaran army had returned to the kingdom to report the results of the siege to King Pollux, Pollux left to go and rebuke the council once again. And he said to them, Do you men not see what has bewitched your hearts? The beast has taken a hold of your minds, even to the point that you sought the needless destruction of another city. I have heeded your orders till now, but no longer. Suffice it to say, I am done in my dealings with you. In about 2 years, the kingdom of Ultira became stronger through the reign of King Pollux. The Ultaran council had been silenced, because the people of Ultira sided in favor with the king's leadership. The people now saw the corruption which was in the council. In those 2 years, the land of Sedima also began to issue threats of war to the land of Ultira. This was because of what King Castor had done to the city of Hether, a city which often traded with the capital city Ishvala. Because the emperor of Ishvala was hostile towards Ultira, for harming their trading system, the two countries were at odds with each other. Therefore, King Pollux and the emperor of Ishvala agreed not to step foot on each other's lands, or else there would be war between them. And because the likelihood of a coming war between them was always a threat, King Pollux set out to regain the emperor of Ishvala's trust, so that Ultira would have a good standing with Sedima. King Pollux said unto the chair members of the council, The state of hostility which binds our nation with the nation of Ishvala keeps me awake at night. I would send some of our city's hunters and adventurers to the land of Sedima to help aid them in their recent troubles with sandworms. I have heard that there is a city by the sand sea which fares great sand boats on the dunes to hunt these monsters. The city which he spoke of was the city of Sulra, which resides in the southernmost portion of the western continent of Sedima. The council did not support his decision, and they knew that Pollux would no longer heed their word, so they did not attempt to stop him. In the southwest region of the land of Sedima, there is a great body of land where the desert sand flows like water. It is called the Sand Sea, and it is the only place in all of creation where sand runs this way. Long ago, in the years of Sino and Sedis explorations, Cedis sent a group of his fellow explorers to sojourn across the southern portion of the continent. When the expedition reached the Sand Sea, their leader Valkua settled with them by the sea. Today, that settlement has become a great city. The city today is called Sulra. Sulra city is home to many hunters and architects who built ships which could sail upon the Sand Sea. Therefore, these ships are called sand boats. These sand boats bring hunters out onto the Sand Sea so that they can hunt the creatures which inhabit the watery sands. Many alchemists love to study the peculiar nature of the sand there, what makes it flow like water. Now there was a certain kind of beast which had begun to infest the Sand Sea, a type of large serpent known as a wyrm, which are wyverns without limbs. The worms which fill the Sand Sea are called sandworms, and some call them sand cobras. A sand cobra has silky smooth white scales and 2 large wings like bats. They slither under the sand like eels, and they jump out of the sand to attack the sand boats, using their hoods to briefly glide in the air until they fall back under the sand. Today, they have been endangered on Arden, yet their numbers remain on the rift plain Hemora. The city of Sulra was dealing with sudden attacks from sandworms, and their hunters could not keep up with the creatures' numbers. The Guild of Sulra also had set up fortification for their harbor, so that the sandworms would not destroy their sand boats. Unlike most nations of Arden, Sulra was led by the Guild, an organization made up of experienced hunters and adventurers, and which oversees handling dangerous creatures that threaten the safety of civilizations. The Guild of Sulra oversaw Sulra's laws and military. Even today the Guild of Sulra is a main hub for hunters and adventurers. Because Sulra was having problems in dealing with the sandworms, King Pollux decided to send an expedition of Altyra's very own hunters and adventurers to the land of Sedima, so that they might once again return to their good standing with them. So Pollux brought the adventurers together before they would head out, and he said to them, if this quest should be successful, then we will have regained our friendship with the land of Sedima, and the Emperor of Ishvala will no longer threaten us with war. However, our agreement with the Emperor still stands, that we should not step foot on their land. Instead, we will land on their shores in peace and quiet, so that their sojourners and travelers will not notice us. We cannot go by airship, as that would draw attention. Hence, you will all go by ship across the Great Sea until you reach the southern region of the continent, and you will traverse the desert until you arrive at the city of Sulra. And King Pollux gave to the captain of the ship a map which led the way to Sulra from where they were to land. He also supplied them with a great amount of water and rations from the palace storage houses, for the journey would be long and strenuous. And when they were fully prepared for their journey, they set sail towards the western continent. In a matter of weeks, the ship reached the shores of Sedima, and they set up camp where they landed, to rest from their long voyage. After that, they took up their tents and continued to tread the vast desert, going northwest. They followed the map, and they traveled around certain towns and cities which were scattered throughout the desert, to avoid confrontation. And by the start of the next month, they finally reached the Great Sand Sea, and they found themselves at the entry gates of the city of Sulra. When the hunters and adventurers came to the gate, the guards which stood on either side halted them, because they saw that they bore the Ultaran crest on their breastplates. And one of the guards said to them, "You bear the Ultaran crest. Why have you stepped foot on our land? The Emperor will find you and kill you." But Davor, the hunter leading them, replied, "Nay, we have not come to declare war. Rather, we would help aid you in your troubles with the sandworms." Then the Sulra guards conversed with each other under their breaths. And Davor showed them a large bag of money, and he said to them, "We will pay to help your city. Would this be enough to let us into your guild?" And the Sulra guards peeked inside the bag, and they saw that the money was of a sufficient quantity. They said to Davor, "It is a good amount. As compensation for your payment, we will have one of our guards show you to the Guild of Sulra. The guild holds passes for boarding the sand boats." With that, a guard who was off duty got up to greet the Ultaran adventurers. He questioned them, saying, "Why are you here?" Davor replied, "His Majesty King Pollux ordered us to come here to help rid the Sand Sea of these sandworms of yours. He hopes that by doing so we may regain the Emperor's trust." Then the guard said, "A very kind gesture, especially for being from an enemy kingdom." And Davor looked away in shame for a moment. Eventually, the guards brought them to the guild hall, where they were brought before the guild master, a woman by the name of Cypher. The guards described the situation to her, pleading the Ultaran's case. Then she said, "So be it, I will give you all passes to board the sand boats. I will stamp the papers so that the other hunters know that this is being taken care of. I'm sure they will be grateful for your help." So Cypher gave each of the Ulteran hunters a sandboat pass, which they wore beside their crests. As they were walking to exit the guild hall, some hunters who were drinking at the tables said, "What are these Ulteran scum doing here?" But others said, "At last, have we found hunters willing to rid us of the sand cobras?" And the Ulteran hunters were led to the docks. Along the way, many of the citizens walking throughout the streets were confused, and some were afraid, when they noticed that the hunters were from Ultira. The Ulterans were led to board 2 ships, and on each ship, there was appointed a captain to watch over them. The sand boats of Sulra were equipped with heavy artillery, each ship having a large harpoon on either side of the deck. Each sand boat also had on the higher deck a large sonic bell, which was used to send shockwaves throughout the sand. The captains of each sand boat explained how these harpoons were to be used, and they gave each hunter on deck bows and arrows, with which they were to use to slay the sand cobras. From there the 2 sand boats set sail upon the watery dunes of the sand sea. Once they had sailed several miles out from Sulra, the captains positioned the ships far apart from each other, so that their harpoons and ballista arrows would not cross paths. Then the captains commanded the hunters, saying, "2 of you must take a mallet, and both must strike the sonic bell at the same time. The shockwave will cause the sand cobras to jump out from the sand." And when they gave the order, the hunters struck the sonic bells, and the sound of them rippled violently throughout the sands, like the waves of the sea. The sand boats began to shake, and many sand serpents jumped out from the dunes. And the captains shouted, "There! Aim for their heads, before they fall back into the sand." Hunters that were positioned at the ballistae aimed at the heads of the sand cobras and fired their arrows. Those who stood in the center of the ship's decks also fired their arrows. Some aimed for their eyes, so that the serpents could not make their paths under the sand. When most of the sand cobras had been blinded, the captain said, "Any serpent you see which is floating upon the sand must be harpooned." So 4 hunters each went to man the harpoon stations, and they awaited the command to fire. When given the command, they fired the harpoon ballistae, and they shot arrows of great size in rapid succession, slaying 9 sand cobras. There remained several cobras which swam under the dunes, so the captains told them to rest while the sonic bells were being prepared to sound the second time. The bells were ready to sound again after a few minutes. As soon as they were ready, the hunters struck them again, and the remaining sand cobras leaped out into the sky. A certain sand cobra jumped over the boat which Davor stood on, and it bit off the sails of the ship. The captain shouted, "Mayday! Mayday! Brace yourselves! You have hunted well, but no man can survive falling into the sand sea. Pray that the others are successful." The serpent fell upon the deck of the ship, and the hunters who were not crushed by it began stabbing it with their daggers. After slaying the serpent, they sank alongside it into the sand sea. The entire ship was lost. Now the other sand boat was further away, and the sand in the air had grown thicker, so they could not see that they had lost their comrades. And their captain, when he had made sure that the sand cobras were taken care of, steered the ship back to Sulra. When they had returned, and when they saw that the other sand boat was not with them, they were afraid. The hunters said, "Have they simply lost their way? Or did the unthinkable happen to them? Davor was one of our best, and now has he been lost. What shall we do?" And, after they had waited a bit longer, they realized that the other ship was never going to return. They wept sorely, then reported back to the guild hall. When Cypher heard the news, she said, "It is unfortunate that you have lost your fellow men, yet it was for a good cause. For we are now free of those pests. Truly, we are grateful to all of you. Now, concerning your payment, we should not grant you anything, because of the state in which our 2 nations find themselves. However, I will send an official report of what your kingdom has done for ours, so that the emperor himself may repent of his hostility towards you." The Ulteran hunters were understanding of this, and one of them said to Cypher, "That is a good enough payment on its own. That was our purpose in aiding you, after all, that our lands may once again become allies." Then an air of warmth began to fill the hall, and the other Sulran hunters and adventurers who were drinking came around the Ulteran hunters to praise and thank them. They bought drinks for the Ulterans, and a great celebration was held in the guild. All the citizens walking the streets outside could hear music and dancing from inside the hall. After a whole night of dancing, and after the Ulterans had also taken time to mourn the loss of their fellow hunters, they were led out of the city and given gifts from the people. As the sun began to rise that morning, the Ulterans embarked on their journey back to the shore. From thence they took their ships back to the eastern continent. The Ulteran Guild's endeavor was a great success, and in the following weeks the Emperor of Sedima noticed what they had done for Sulra. Because of this, the Emperor sent a balloon airship to Ultyra, carrying many gifts from the wealthy people of Ishvala. When King Pollux went to check the airship in the aerodrome, he found a scroll attached to the side of one of the gifts. He took the scroll to read it to the people later that day. King Pollux brought the people of Ultyra before the palace, and he held the scroll in his hands. And he said, "Hear, my beloved people. We have received wondrous news today. As I am sure many of you who live in the second quadrant have seen, an airship from the capital of Sedima has landed in our very aerodrome. It bore gifts for our royal household, as well as this scroll, which I shall read before you now." Pollux began to read the scroll, saying, "To the exceedingly humble King Pollux of Ultyra, and to his royal household, as well as the people of Ultyra. The kindness you have shown to the people of the city of Sulra has not gone unnoticed, and it will not go unrewarded. Upon hearing about your quest in Sulra, I must admit I had to gather my thoughts, whether it was the truth. I immediately had many of the wealthy folks of our city bring gifts to my palace, and I have prepared an airship by which I will send these gifts to you. Not only this, but you have also regained my trust. I hereby decree the restoration of our land's diplomatic relations and allyship." The people responded with a brief silence, until King Pollux said, "What say you? We have regained the land of Sedima's trust. No more battles, no more blood shall be shed between our lands." Then the people began to cheer. Now after these things had taken place, the council called for King Pollux. And when he was before them, they said, "Your Majesty, we understand that you will not listen to us if we ask for the destruction of a city. However, would you perhaps consider if we ask that you conquer a certain city?" And Pollux said, "It all depends. What city, and for what reason? Explain yourselves." A member of the council explained, saying, "I'm sure you know of the current state of the Rift Plain Karen, how their nations are at odds with each other. The Cold War there has grown more intense, with nations constantly threatening each other with destructive arc-light spells. You should also know that many kingdoms there are studying how to create more powerful arc-light elements through strange alchemy." Pollux responded, "Indeed. I am aware of these things. Are you supposing that I should be helping the nations of Karen? I do not believe such a task to be easy, nor even possible." But the chair members continued, saying, "No. Hear the rest of the matter. While you know about these nations, we know you have not heard of a certain city by the name of Kulav. It is a growing city which lies to the far west of the center point of the Rift Plain, quite hidden from the rest of the nations. Lately, we have been going to visit them through the Rift Gate of Thasha. Recently, they have been on the verge of anarchy. Their people are at war with each other, and they have no ruler or king." Now that they had explained themselves, King Pollux was genuinely intrigued, and said unto them, "Shall I bring order to them? I would not be able to rule over them myself, but I may appoint a king from among them, one who is proven to be worthy." The council nodded in agreement, and Aranotha, who was among them, said, "Yes, we are asking if you would bring order to the city of Kulav. You must conquer them first, show them that you have power over them." King Pollux agreed to do this, and he brought many of his servants before his throne later that same day. He said unto them, "I have decided to bring you all with me on a quest, which I have accepted at the council's behest. There is a city on the Rift Plain Karen called Kulav which has been spiraling into anarchy. For they have no king or queen, no governor or mayor. Therefore, you shall all come with me and aid me in bringing order to their city. If any of you are afraid to do this, raise your right hand." No one raised their hand. Therefore, King Pollux went with his servants to the aerodrome to board a smaller crystal-powered airship, so that they could reach the capital of Grianara quickly. And when they had landed in the mountains, in the city of Thasha, they paid the toll for the Rift Gate which stood in the public square. After the Coronian rift crystals were set in the gate, they went through it to arrive on Karen. King Pollux arrived with his servants on the Rift Plain Karen. They came out through the Rift Gate which stood in the public square of the city of Jupin, a city in the west of the only province of Karen. Dupin is well known by Coronians for its amusements and theatre. They also hold many masquerade balls throughout the year. The square in which the Rift Gate stood was in the center of the streets, with the ballroom and theatre on either side. Pollux and his servants boarded a ship, which was captained by a man named Barge, who was skilled at maneuvering ships through the rocky cliffs scattered about the Sea of Charon. And when Barge saw Pollux, he said, your clothes are mighty flashy. You must be very rich. Hold on a minute, I recognize that crest. Ulterans? Ulterans here, on Charon? What occasion? The servants could not understand his speech well, because of his accent. But Pollux replied, I am the king of Ultyra, and these are my royal servants. When Barge heard this, he began to panic. And he said, what have you come to do with us? I am just keeping a living here. I can't have this city taken away from me. And Pollux gently replied, do not be afraid. We have not come to conquer or to destroy this city. Why would I do such a thing? We have merely come for a ride across the sea. We must go to the city of Kulav. Barge then said, are you crazy? That is a city of madmen, and they're always fighting each other. I reckon they probably don't even have much left in the city as far as food and shelter goes. Then King Pollux placed his hand on Barge's shoulder, and he said, tell me your name, sir. He said, Barge. It is nice to meet you, Barge. I will pay you however much you need to bring me and my servants to Kulav, Pollux said. With great hesitation, Barge eventually opened his hand, and said, I will only take you for no less than 100 silvers. And Pollux said, that is no problem. Here. And he placed a bag of 300 silver coins in Barge's hand. Feeling the weight of the bag, Barge jumped for joy, saying, this is more than 100 silvers. Thank you, thank you. My family will be so grateful. Bless you. May Toniel bless your work. I will take you, yes. With that, King Pollux and his royal servants climbed aboard Barge's ship. The time it took for the ship to reach Kulav was about 7 hours, and the ship was built for speed. And when they came near to the port of Kulav, Barge said, I am afraid to get any closer, so I will hide when I dock the ship, and I will not drop the anchor. When the ship's starboard side touched the dock, Pollux and his servants climbed off, and they waved and said their farewells to Barge. Barge immediately steered the ship away from the port, and eventually his ship disappeared into the fog. Once Pollux and his servants had reached the top of the stone steps which led to the city, they could hear the roar of the people. There were people fighting and dueling with swords in the streets, and small bazaar stands were set on fire. Children were also running about holding torches and shouting obscenities. Pollux was appalled, and he said to his servants, what shall we do to grab their attention? And one of them said, we have brought weapons. Why not use them to incite fear and bring order? Pollux agreed. Pollux and his men went out amongst the raging people of the city, and they began to fight against them, dodging the children. The people eventually came to notice that they were fighting against Ulterans. Then many began to shout, kill them. They aren't welcome here. And others said, we'll see just how big and strong the greatest kingdom is now. And Pollux gave them what they asked for. There were 2 of Pollux's men who were Aeons, and Pollux sent them out into the midst of the raging crowds on either side of them. When the Aeons had reached far enough into the crowds, they shot up great flashes of plasma arclight into the air. The great flashes shocked the people, and they stood still for a moment. Then Pollux said with a loud voice, be still, people of Kulav. We have come to put an end to your rebellion against each other. Whoever will come and fight, as well as defeat us, will be appointed as the ruler of this city. Then a man shouted from the crowd, who are you to tell us what to do? Who said we ever needed any ruler? Now Pollux had said this to test and see who would be willing to listen, so that he could weed out the people who were the cause of the anarchy and set aside those who were victims. After Pollux repeated himself a couple more times, one man came out from the crowds to stand before him. And Pollux said, tell me your name. The man replied, my name is Avla. I have been trapped in this city for so long, and I have prayed every morning for Toniel to send us a ruler. Your challenge poses the perfect opportunity for change. In fact, I believe Toniel himself did indeed send you to save us from ourselves. After he said this, King Pollux looked around at the crowds, and they had begun fighting again. And he said to Avla, "Take up your sword, and fight with us. Prove you are able to tame these people." Avla took up his sword, and together with the Ultrans he fought the crowds and saved the women and children who were hurt. The struggle of Kulav lasted 13 hours, until the people finally could no longer resist Pollux, Avla, and the royal servants. When the people had calmed down, King Pollux raised his sword and shouted, "I, King of Ultyra, have come to bring order to this city. I could bring my entire army on a dreadnought airship, and I could have them destroy this city in a single moment. But no, I have chosen to restore you instead." The people gasped when he said he was a king. Then Pollux placed the blade of his sword on Avla's shoulder, saying, "From this day forth, I have deemed this man Avla to be your ruler. He has proven his worth, both in his skill in battle, as well as his patience in dealing with you stubborn and troubled people. He shall be your king." Though the people at first were hesitant in accepting Avla as their ruler, they soon came to accept him. So from that day forth Kulav was no longer a city of anarchy. Avla was given a seat of power in the city, and he began to rule with a rod of iron. And when the people's violent ways began to cease, he ruled peacefully and mercifully with them. In the next 2 years, Kulav's reputation was restored, and the people of Dupin and of the other cities began practicing commerce with them again. Avla never forgot the great thing which King Pollux had done for them, nor did any of the other Coronian cities forget. Because of this, the cities of the province of Karen began sending gifts to Ultyra yearly, in the same month in which Kulav was saved, just as the Emperor of Ishvala had done. The good things King Pollux had been doing in those years began to strengthen Ultyra's reputation among the other lands of Arden. Panerva, Anarek, Grianara, Paishaw, Emek, even Hara, Sephoa, Kelia, Senoa, and Sedima had ceased in threatening Ultyra with war. The Ultaran Council was very proud of their king as well, and they came to revere him. There was never a king of Ultyra before Pollux who was revered by the council. Henceforth the kingdom of Ultyra grew in its military power and amicable dealings with other nations, and the name of their king was made known throughout all the nations. For the next 297 years, King Pollux kept his kingdom safe from the Great War, as well as many other kingdoms which had fallen victim to the influence of the beast. In the year 4869, King Pollux laid in his bed, and his guards and royal servants stood close at his bedside, pointing their swords to the floor. And before he gave his last breath, King Pollux said, "My beloved servants, we have persevered through many trials and battles these past 200 years, and they have made our kingdom stronger. My hour is here, but never any of you be afraid. Follow the light, that your bones will remain in their strength throughout your years. Alas, I go to my eternal home." And Pollux took his last breath, and he died at the age of 298. After his death, there was such a great funeral which had not been held in Ultyra since the death of King Ankajar. The people of Ultyra mourned greatly for the loss of their great king, as did many other nations which had been saved by him. Now the legacy of King Pollux lives on to this day.